how often do we talk about the incestuousness of Washington and how people are interconnected, and how often are we frustrated, as we just expressed in our previous interview, with the so-called Republican leadership and not willing to do this and not willing to do that. Now we read about the fact that Barack Obama and John McCain are now best buds, and McCain is helping Obama, make deals in the Senate. And you say to yourself, what's going on here? There's a wonderful new book out, which if you're a Washington junkie, if you're a political junkie, and you must be if you're listening to or watching this show, This Town is the name of the book. 2 parties and a funeral, plus plenty of valet parking in America's Gilded Capital, by Mark Leibovich. He is a chief national correspondent for the New York Times Magazine. Hey, Mark, how are you?
Hi, Steve. It's good to be here.
Well, thank you for coming on. I am holding up the book for all the Newsmax TV listeners, or viewers, I should say, to see. And good luck with it. Before we go too much further, I know you didn't write the cover story on Weiner, but it was the New York Times Magazine cover story that kind of set the stage for Weiner to be launched back into the public eye with his announcement that he would run for mayor. And now we are where we are, where he came out yesterday, and today he took to the internet. It turns out now he was sexting 3 months ago. But I want to ask you about Huma Abedin, because you probably know a lot about her and her connections, of course, to Hillary Clinton, her unlikely marriage to Weiner, the fact that many have accused her of, and I believe from the evidence I've seen, rightfully so, of having these Muslim Brotherhood family member connections from her mother and her father and others. And in fact, when John McCain blasted 5 congresspeople, including Michelle Bachmann, for daring to question those connections. Nonetheless, what do you make of the Huma Abedin-Weiner relationship, and the fact that now Huma, is standing by her man like Hillary did with Bill 20 years ago?
Yeah, I think if there's one thing we learned from the Bill and Hillary thing, and really anything, is you just don't know what's going on in a marriage, right? Sometimes even when you're in it. So I don't know. I think it's obviously it's not something I have any insight into, and I think their short-term goal is to get elected mayor of New York, and she wants to be the first lady of New York. So I guess they sort of figured out this is the way to do it. But there's obviously a big dynamic here that I don't even pretend to know about. Probably don't even want to know about it.
Yeah, probably. Well, it will be a lot cleaner if we don't know what we don't know. Unfortunately, if you read the New York Post today, I couldn't even read on the air with their little deletions what those texts were saying to that woman. Let's leave Weiner, mercifully, and let's go on to, before we get to the whole book, there was a Washington Post story that came out of your book a while ago, that in the summer 2010, as the Republicans were ready to take over the House, Darrell Issa was, of course, going to lead the Oversight Committee. The White House started urging reporters to write negative stories about Issa, and we heard a lot of those negative things come out as the hearings progressed. The Democrats started attacking him, but how commonplace this is from your book, I should say the Washington Post story quotes from your book. How commonplace is this that the White House will ask reporters to carry its water, if you will?
Oh yeah, it's very common. I think it's not unique to this White House, though. It's been going on for every administration, and I just happened to sort of lower the curtain a little bit on what my experience was and how I came to write originally about Darrell Issa. But look, that goes on, in pretty much every partisan office on both sides throughout town, and I guess for better or for worse, that's the price of doing business here. But the White House is certainly not immune, despite how pure they might have presented themselves when they first ran to get here.
Right, which leads me to this question on transparency and all these other things, ethics, and it won't be business as usual, and and we see the ambassadors are all, a lot of them are bundlers, former bundlers, and big campaign contributors to Obama. It's pretty much been business as usual as far as that goes. So how does this White House, in your experience, compare when it comes to openness, when it comes to transparency, when it comes to manipulation of the press?
Well, I think clearly, they're playing the game as hard as anyone. I think I mean, what's unique about this administration is that they spent a good part of 2007 and 2008 saying they're going to be different and talking about change and really kind of presenting themselves as just a much purer version of the Washington as usual that they were running against. So, I mean, does that mean we hold them to a higher standard? Absolutely. So, I mean, I think that every time that they fall short on that, and I think they have on many, many occasions, you have to sort of put it all in light of the larger context, which begins, with their original message.
Well, Mark, let me ask you, the incestuous relationships that you talk about in your book, This Town, let me talk about the media. We do a lot of yakking and yabbing about the double standard in the media on this show, and it's documented. It's not just speculation. When it turns out that I think the brothers or the siblings of the president of ABC News and CBS News worked at the White House in capacities relating to Benghazi, and that people within those networks were reprimanded, at least on CBS, Cheryl Atkinson, for being overambitious on their reporting on Benghazi, etc. And this one's married to that one, and that one's married to this one that we don't even know about or the public doesn't know about. Again, how much of an influence does that have on what the public gets to hear and how they get to hear it?
Well, I mean, I think, first of all, the notion that this is a small town and that everyone's interconnected is not unique to this era. I think what's happened now is that, again, it's just become that much more amplified because you have, first of all, there's so much more media, and it's just so much easier for everyone to sort of become their own media entity, right? And I mean, in the case of CBS, I mean, you have the president of CBS News, David Rhodes, who's the brother of Ben Rhodes, who's the assistant deputy national security advisor. So, I mean, that's a unique situation. I mean, I didn't get into the Cheryl Atkinson thing, but I think, look, I mean, one of the big points of the book, and I think people on both sides are appreciating it, but especially on the right, because I think it's maybe more of a revelation, is that Washington is not as hopelessly divided as everyone says it is. It's, in fact, hopelessly interconnected. And this is a city where it's not so much there are Democrats and Republicans as it is there are millionaires and it is people who are doing business together, and even the yelling that you see on TV and on the blogs and stuff is kind of a kabuki version of politics, and people are doing really, really well. And I think that the dysfunction and, frankly, the corruption that you see in this town is itself probably good for its own business while the rest of the country suffers.
Yeah, no, I agree. We're talking to Mark Leibovich. He is the author of a brand new book, This Town, 2 Parties and a Funeral, plus plenty of valet parking in America's Gilded Capital. Also the chief national correspondent for the New York Times Magazine here on the Steve Malzberg Show. Let's talk about the scandals and the attacks that have been leveled on ISA, but this IRS thing. And in conjunction with Benghazi, in conjunction with the Justice Department going after journalists, they came boom, boom, boom.
Right.
If this had been happening under Bush, one of them or all of them, don't you think the media, don't you think we would have, for instance, yesterday the networks devoted 85 additional minutes to the royal baby, but did not report on the fact that the latest on the IRS scandal, which was that you had auditors talking about how people, how the man who actually wrote the enhanced rules or guidelines for going after conservative groups was at the White House 48 hours meeting personally with the president before he wrote that memo on those guidelines. I mean, if that was Bush and it was that situation, don't you think this would be a whole different world we're living in?
Maybe. I mean, I honestly don't know. I mean, a lot of people, I'm sure, have speculated on that and will speculate on it. I mean, I do think that in the last few months, obviously the White House has had some real challenges, as they'd say. But look, every time something like this happens, I mean, people are going to compare it sort of hypothetically to how it was under Bush, or how it would be under Bush, or how it would be under the next guy. But it's certainly a very very popular and very, very common lament you hear and complaint you hear, especially from the right.
Well, yeah, all right, and again, to make the point, I want to get back to the book in a second, but for instance, the portrayal of the Tampa Republican Convention as this almost this pro-rape convention, because of the remarks made by one congressman, which he took back and apologized for, et cetera, and the war on women, and I blame the Republicans for not fighting back, but nonetheless, who was the keynote speaker at the Democratic convention? A man who was accused of, rape, sexual assault, exposing himself, an affair in the Oval Office with an intern, lying to a federal grand jury, being disbarred, being impeached. He's the hero. He's the god of the Democratic convention and party. So, I mean, the hypocrisy knows no bounds in my view.
Look, I mean, Bill Clinton, I think they would argue, and I'm not ducking your question, but I think they would argue that, look, when Bill Clinton was president, he was put through the ringer and attacked in the most personal of ways. And look, I don't, we can relitigate the Clinton years as much as you want, but no, I mean, look, I think what you have here, Steve, is just a massive noise machine. And what happens is, look, people sometimes take me to task, or just, because I happen to be the guy on the other end of the phone, for all the sins of the media, or all the alleged sins of the media, or all the alleged sins of the New York Times, or our editorial page, or what have you.
I didn't go there. Notice I didn't go there.
I know, but everyone else is. Now, look, I understand. I mean, we, in a weird way, people talk about the media as like a singular entity, and they talk about, news organizations as a single entity. And the only thing I can tell you is just we're just not that organized. I mean, I've never been to a meeting in which we say, well, we're going to go after this today, we're going to say that today. I mean, I don't doubt that there's media bias. I just think that, look, the media is a huge, sprawling entity, and I have a hard enough time, making my own deadlines and writing my own stories, and hopefully, building my own reputation, and ideally, maybe even selling a book or two.
Well, I think you'll sell books without a doubt, because this stuff is interesting, and like I said, it's the political junkies, food. Let me ask you two more before I let you go.
Sure.
The fact of this book, or what this book shows me, is, it's convinced me more than ever. I can never run for political office, although people say it to me all the time. One, because every word I've ever said for 4 hours a day, for 5 days a week, for 30 years, all they need is 30 seconds worth taken out of context, and I'm done. So I know that. But also someone like the guy down the block from me, who's an accountant. He could never go to Washington. He could never make it. With a rare exception. If you're not connected to get into the Washington connected world, or maybe you have to be connected to that world to get into it in the first place, but you have to be connected on the state level, the local level, and then get connected on the Washington level. It's just almost impossible, right?
Well, there are barriers to entry. You can actually get elected to Congress, or it is possible to, even in this day and age, you can become a blogger, you can get on TV as a strategist or something. So, there is a kind of anarchy in the peanut gallery now. But I think what's interesting to me, and what I've found just in writing and really sort of blowing the lid off Washington, if you want to put it that way, is just this is people left and right run against Washington, right, as this cesspool, as this swamp, and then they get here, and so often, and more often than not, they settle into the place like it's a warm bath, and they never go home. Our founders always sort of envisioned public service as something that people might devote a few years to, and then go back to the farm and return to their communities. That doesn't happen anymore. People sort of punch their ticket to Washington, and if they can get here, if they can get a job title, they're going to be trading off it for their entire life, because that's the kind of wealth and that's the kind of self-service that's available for really, really cheap and not a lot of real work.
Right.
So that's sort of the city we've developed.
Absolutely. We're talking one more question for the author of This Town, Mark Leibovich, here on the Steve Malzberg Show. Okay, this whole Trayvon Martin thing, George Zimmerman, the relationship or the ability of Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, and the so-called civil rights groups like that, the NAACP, to dictate or to policy insofar as forcing an arrest and a trial down in Florida when the authorities really had no stomach for it, didn't see a case there. The prosecution, which almost everybody says was overzealous and charged way too high. And then, of course, this statement from the president, Trayvon, if I had a son, he would have looked like Trayvon, which I don't know how that's possible. If I had a daughter and something happened to a girl in Kansas City, and I said if I had a daughter, she'd look like me, or why? How is that possible? Anyway, and Eric Holder after the verdict saying, I'm troubled by it. The prosecutor herself calling him a murderer after the verdict. Let's focus on Eric Holder, though, here, and Barack Obama. African-American Attorney General, African-American President, weighing in like this on a case which many people say had no race in it, but it's been made racial, maybe by the President and the Attorney General, if by no one else. How does Sharpton and Jackson, how do they how does their almost carte blanche or relationship, especially in Sharpton's case with Obama, and I would assume with Holder, how does that all play in Washington?
Well, I mean, look, I think what happens when you have a high-profile event like this is everyone, again, just sort of assumes their place in the noise machine. And I think, the fact that Al Sharpton works at MSNBC, for example, is, it's got to be uncomfortable for people who work there. I know people who, at any network, that's just like you have a newsmaker who's also the host of a show. But we've seen, I wouldn't say we've seen this movie before. First of all, it's an individual tragedy. It's a personal tragedy. And
absolutely.
And I don't think anyone denies that. But I think, I guess maybe my personal grievance is, I'm trying to, I've been talking about, everyone's been talking about this for a week, and I don't know where this argument ever goes. And I think what's unique, obviously, is you have an African-American president, an African-American attorney general.
Right, which is where I'm trying to take it, yeah. And
right.
The relationship that we know the president has with Sharpton, and I'm just curious in this town context, how that all plays into what we've seen happen.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, I'm not privy to their relationship or what they've been talking about, but we've proven sort of time and time again that these are the kinds of discussions. Race is not the kind of issue that's going to lend itself to rational discussion over the long period.
Right. All right.
That's
Listen.
a duck. I don't know.
No. Fine, Mark. And a very interesting conversation, and the book just as interesting. And it's called This Town by Mark Leibovich. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.